everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Isabelle Knight. I am a teen writer and middle grade fantasy author of the Enchantria series. And today I am super excited to be back here again with another author interview. And today I shall be interviewing the wonderful Caroline Carlson, who is the author of this wonderfully whimsical, humorous middle grade fantasy, Wicked Marigold.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I am delighted to join you all.
Yeah. So to start us off, could you introduce yourself, your book, and how you got the idea for Wicked Marigold?
Absolutely. My name is Caroline. I have written 7 books for middle grade readers now. Most of them are fantasy novels. All of them I try to make as funny as I can. And Wicked Marigold in particular was a really fun book to write. It's about a princess named Marigold. And she is kind of a normal person. She has things that she's good at. She's nice most of the time, but maybe not all the time. Maybe she throws a tantrum every now and then, like most of us do. But the thing about Marigold is that she has an older sister, Princess Rosalind, and Princess Rosalind is perfect. In fact, Princess Rosalind is so perfect that when she was a baby, before Marigold was even born, Princess Rosalind was kidnapped by a wicked wizard, Torval, and taken away to live in his tower. So Marigold has actually never met her, but she's always hearing stories about how great Rosalind was and how she could make flowers bloom just by walking by them and things like that. And then one day when Marigold is 11, Princess Rosalind returns. She escapes from the wizard's tower and she comes back to the kingdom of Imberville, where Marigold has been living very happily. And everyone, naturally, is thrilled that Rosalind is back. They throw big parties. There's a festival that lasts for a month. Rosalind is so beautiful and so kind and so gentle, and Marigold starts to realize that she's never going to be as good as Rosalind is, no matter how hard she tries. And she tries really hard. She tries so hard to be as good as Rosalind, and she just can't be. So she decides instead that she's going to be wicked. And she's going to be like the best wicked princess there ever was, the most wicked of all. And she decides that she's going to run away to meet the wizard Torval and have him teach her how to be as wicked as possible. So she does this, but of course, her plans don't go exactly the way she thinks they will. And she discovers that being wicked is just as difficult as being perfectly good.
Yeah. So, could you tell us a bit about how you got the idea for Wicked Marigold?
I can. Yeah, it came from, actually, this is the first time as a writer that this has happened to me so directly. I was watching a movie with my daughter, who was maybe 2 years old at the time. We were watching the Disney movie Tangled, which, if you are familiar with it, and I'm sure your viewers probably are, it's a retelling of the story of Rapunzel. And at the end of the movie, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler. If you haven't seen it, just cover your ears. Rapunzel returns. She's been captured by the evil witch, and she returns to her parents. And the music swells, and they embrace, and everyone is so happy, and it's a lovely moment. And I sat there thinking, I wonder what it would have been like if Rapunzel had had a little sister. Like a sister who'd never met her. Would she also be excited about this? Or would that feel like such a big change in her life and maybe not a very good change? So I started thinking about a story about 2 sisters where, one was this hero and the other was just a normal person. And I've always loved fairy tales, reading fairy tales, writing stories inspired by fairy tales. So it seemed like a fun project to take on to set Marigold's story in this kind of aggressively fairy tale world with a character who is very much not a fairy tale sort of character.
Yeah, I love how you got that idea, and I absolutely love the movie Tangled. I remember I just watched it over and over and over again as a kid, and once Once thought that, oh, what if I could grow out my hair to be as long as Rapunzel's? It did
It
not
does seem like
happen.
a lot of maintenance. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that didn't happen, which is probably for the best. Yeah, but that is really cool, and I really love how you were like inspired by like a movie, like a sort of, like this fairy tale retelling. And it definitely is indeed set in, this very fairy tale world, which I really loved.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Wicked Marigold is also just this very fun, humorous middle grade read, and like I laughed out loud so many times during the story. And so, could you tell us a bit about what inspired you to write a humorous middle grade book?
Sure. Yeah. I'm so glad you laughed. That makes me feel very, very pleased. Because I never know if what I think is funny is going to translate to readers, and hopefully some of what I think is funny will be funny to you too. I love funny books as a reader. I think it's so important to laugh. There's a time and a place for all kinds of books. I don't only read funny books. I read some, very sad books or very serious books. But having a great, funny book to curl up with, maybe on a day when you're not feeling so great about the world, or you just want something to cheer you up, I don't really think there's anything better. And also, as a writer, you probably know this, the process of writing can be very hard. And some days you just don't want to sit down at your computer or your notebook and write. Like, it just sounds like the worst thing in the world. Even if you love your story and your characters and you love writing, just having to write every day can be very difficult. So
Yeah.
if I can sit there and make myself laugh, it's a lot more fun. I always tell kids when I visit schools to talk about writing, I say, if I'm not having fun writing my book, you are probably not going to have much fun reading it. So I need to make sure that I'm having a good time, and then hopefully you'll have a good time too when you read the story. So I've always been drawn to humor. All of my books have some humor in them, even the ones that I don't think are that funny. I hear from other people that they thought the book was pretty funny, so that's really nice to hear. This one I was definitely trying to put some humor into. But I think the question that you have about like how to write humor and how to insert humorous moments into a book, even when there are like deeper emotional themes, it's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about and studying other writers to see how they do it. Because in a funny book, maybe you are the sort of writer who just wants to write a really slapstick comedy that doesn't have any deeper meaning. It's just people doing ridiculous things. And actually, a lot of people do that, and the books are very good and very popular. So there's nothing wrong with that. But if you do want to write a funny book that also has like deeper emotional resonance, which I like to do, because that's the kind of thing I like to read, you have to really figure out how to balance those elements so that your readers will laugh, but also not be surprised when something serious happens. Like, it won't be too jarring. And I think it doesn't always work, but the strategy that I usually try to use from a craft perspective is to keep the plot events humorous, but to give the character a really quite serious emotional life. So what's happening on the page might be funny to us, but it's not necessarily funny to the characters. In Wicked Marigold, there is a scene early on, so I don't think it's too much of a spoiler, where Marigold is trying to ruin her sister Rosalind's big party. And she comes into her bathroom. She's feeling like everyone cares about Rosalind and no one cares about her. And she goes into the bathroom that's attached to her bedroom, and it is filled with birds, like ducks and pelicans and all sorts of different kinds of birds. And they have all been enchanted to magically sing a song about how great Rosalind is. And that was one of the funniest parts of the book for me to write. It was like writing a song about singing ducks is very fun.
Yeah.
And I hope did it make you laugh?
Yeah, like it. I feel like even just talking about the scene, just I have to force myself to hold back laughter, and even I was just laughing so hard during that scene while also thinking at the same time, poor Marigold. Like,
Yes, exactly. So it's very funny to us, but to Marigold, it's like the worst thing that could possibly happen. Is like you're already feeling bad. Everyone likes your sister
yep.
more than you. And then like you can't even go to use your own bathroom in peace because it's full of birds talking about how great your sister is. It's like, to us it's hilarious, to her it is deeply hurtful, and her emotions are real, even though the situation is very, very silly. So I always try to keep that in mind, that like even if something is funny to us as readers, the character's emotional response to it should also be there and is equally powerful. And that can be hard, but it does mean that if you kind of keep your character's emotions at the heart of the story, even as ridiculous things are happening all around them, it means that when there are sometimes points in the story, like toward the end of the book, which I won't talk about in too much detail, there are some moments that are just like not funny. There's one moment in particular that it was important for me to take away all the humor because it was only serious. And I worried about that moment a lot and how readers would receive it. And I ended up rewriting it several times because I didn't want it to be too different from the rest of the book. I didn't want readers to feel like they'd wandered into a serious book by accident. But I hoped that by that point, by the very end of the book, you're with the characters emotionally, hopefully, and you're feeling what they're feeling if the author has done a good job. And I hoped that that would be okay, that there had been enough humor going forward, but enough emotional resonance as well, that when you hit the spot where the humor goes away for a few pages, you kind of go with it. But it's really tricky. I don't know if I succeeded. Maybe readers can let me know.
Yeah, well, I definitely think you succeeded because, like one of the things I really loved about Wicked Marigold was, like, how, like, as you said, like, it has a lot of humor and a lot of funny moments, but at the same time, there are still, like, serious things happening, and, Marigold is stuck in these very sticky situations, and she must sort of try to get herself out of these,
Yeah. It's you don't want the stakes to feel small. If you want readers to keep turning the pages and get excited for what's happening next, it needs to feel important that the character solves her problem. And it might happen in a very funny way, but it has to feel important to the character, even if it's not like a situation that most of us would find ourselves in.
Yeah.
It has to be important to the people who are experiencing it.
Yeah, and I won't give any spoilers, but I loved, like, how, like, the conflict was sort of resolved in this book. Like, again, no spoilers, but it was very hilarious, and it was one of the parts that, again, just had me laughing out loud.
I'm so glad. Yeah, that was another, the very end is a, excuse me, a tricky part. Because, like, objectively, if you think about what's happening, the villains get what they deserve. I don't think that's too much of a spoiler. There's a happy ending. But if you think about what's happening to them, like, it's not very nice at all. But keeping that humorous tone going really helps it from becoming, like, you don't want a book that's going to bum you out.
Yeah.
If you're reading a lighthearted fantasy novel, you don't want an ending that's going to make you feel sad and depressed. So I tried to keep the humor going even as the villains are getting their comeuppance.
Yeah. And, I really loved all of the characters in the book. And so, like, how did you come up with Marigold and Torville's characters?
I was trying to think about that a little bit over the past few days because it's actually been a while since I wrote the very first draft. I started writing this book in 2019, and it was published in 2024. So actually, like, the time from first draft to publication was quite long. And so trying to remember where I started is tricky. But Marigold, I think, again, like her personality, I just thought, well, she's going to be a normal person dealing with a world where the expectations for people, especially princesses, are completely unrealistic. And a lot of people have asked me, since this is a story in part about sisters, people have asked me if I'm a younger sister or if I have an older sister. I have been very happy to hear that some younger sisters and older sisters think that like the sibling relationship in the book is a good representation of sisters. But I'm not a younger sister. I'm an older sister to a younger brother.
Oh.
So I have not been a younger sister who's intensely jealous of my older sister. I don't have a perfect older sister. My younger brother is very nice. But I think what I drew on for Marigold's character was the feeling that I think all of us have, no matter whether we have siblings, when we have an idea of how we should be, how we want to be, how we want to live our lives, the kind of wonderful person that we aspire to be versus the person that we really are most of the time. I think a lot of us have aspirations and dreams of being, really kind and really generous all the time and never snapping at other people, never getting into arguments, always being, on time with your work and relentlessly cheerful. And just most of us are not built that way. And it can be very frustrating to think, I really let myself down today. I wasn't as nice to my family as I wanted to be. I didn't do all that work I was supposed to do. My house isn't as beautiful as I wish it were because I didn't take very good care of it today. And that feeling of not quite measuring up, I think you don't have to be a younger sister to experience. So that was really where a lot of Marigold came from. Torval is another character who is pretty interesting to me because kind of like Marigold, he is not really a fairy tale character in this fairy tale story. He starts out, he's a wicked wizard. You think, oh yeah, like standard issue wicked wizard. But he's a more complicated character, as you learn over the course of the book. He hasn't always been wicked himself. It's kind of a question about how wicked he ultimately is. And when I was writing all of the characters in the book, I kind of divided them into two different buckets in my head. There are some characters who are fairy tale characters and some characters who are real people. And Rosalind is a fairy tale character. She literally has flowers blooming under her feet and animals come to talk to her. She is not a real person. She is firmly from the world of fairy tales. Some of the villains are very wicked in ways that are really like fairy tale evil. And they are firmly in fairy tale world. And then most of the main characters are kind of in between. They are what it might look like if you or I walked into a fairy tale and we didn't really know where we belonged or what to do with ourselves. So I think Marigold and Torval are both really interesting to me as well because they occupy that space that is like a real person trying to be good or be wicked or like trying to make themselves into something that maybe they're not entirely. And maybe the better course of action is to just be themselves, whoever that turns out to be.
Yeah, I really love that. And, like, do you ever base any characters in your books on people, like, you know in real life? And do you have a favorite characters that you've ever written?
Yeah. So I don't base my characters on real people. I was going to say that there was one exception that I have a book called The Door at the End of the World, where there is a really unpleasant character named Michael, and he's just very annoying to the main characters. And I might have based him on somebody that I met, but now I can't even remember who that person is. So I was like, I'm going to really get back at this annoying person by putting them into a book. And then they clearly weren't all that annoying because I don't even know who they were. So I'm going to say that I do not put real people into my books. I do try to base my characters on different parts of myself. Even the bad guys, maybe especially the bad guys. There's always, some element of yourself that you can give to your characters, even if they're nothing like you. They always have real emotions, hopefully, to one degree or another. There's always something that's making them the way they are, even if they're awful. And I try to think about, I don't know what it's like to be anyone else other than myself. So I can think about what would make me act this way? What would turn me into a villainous pirate, or turn me into an evil wizard who wants to take over the world? How would that work? In terms of favorite character, I always tell people it's like, choosing your favorite child. You can't really do it. I love all of my characters. There are some characters who have been easier to write than others. Usually the characters who are kind of humorous sidekicks are pretty fun to write. Like in Wicked Marigold, let's see, there's this little guy, Pettifog.
I love Pettifog.
Pettifog's an imp, and he likes helping Torval with his wicked deeds, but also he likes to do embroidery and iron things and bake fruit pies. And he has come from the world of demons because it's really messy and nobody likes to wear nice suits there. And he much prefers the world of humans where he can just be tidy and stir the cauldron in a nice way. And in some of my other books, the Very Nearly Honorable League of Pirates series, there's a character who's kind of serves a similar purpose called the Gargoyle. And he eats spiders and just, makes hilarious commentary on all the things that the main characters are trying to do. And those characters are a lot of fun to write because you don't have to think all the time about what's their deeper emotional life. You want to know a little bit about what makes them tick. And in Pettifog's case, we do learn about, his history and the things he cares about. But often he's there to provide a little bit of humor in what might be a stressful situation for the main characters. So that's always a lot of fun. But I love them all. I care about all of them. Maybe not quite as much the evildoers as the good guys, but since they're all a little bit of me, I have to like them at least a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, as a writer myself, I do feel like favorite character is kind of a very, very hard question to answer. And oftentimes, whenever someone asks me, oh, what's your favorite character that you've ever written? My answer is always very different every time I get asked it, just because, I don't know, for some reason, depending on what I'm feeling in the moment, suddenly, I relate to this character more at this moment or something, and it's just...
Yeah, and it can really change from day to day.
Yeah.
Especially if I find that whatever I'm working on at the moment is usually the most exciting and interesting thing to me. So if somebody asks me what my favorite character is or what my favorite book that I've written is, it's probably something that I've just done because it's most recently in my mind. But I felt that way about my other characters and my other books when I was working on them. So it really can change.
Yeah. And how did you come up with the Cacophonous Kingdoms, and how do you typically develop setting when writing?
Yeah, again, I was trying to think about how I came up with the Cacophonous Kingdoms, which is hard to say, it turns out. I think I actually came up with the name first, the Cacophonous Kingdoms. I was trying to think of a good name for a group of kingdoms, and that sounded fun. And then cacophony is, of course, a lot of really loud noises all at the same time. It does not sound good. It sounds like you're all yelling at each other. So from the name, the Cacophonous Kingdoms, came the idea that there would be all these different kingdoms who are always bickering and fighting and getting into disagreements and sending evil magical spells to one another. In general, I think I don't really know how other fantasy writers do this. I'd be curious to hear how other people tackle this. But I don't sit down and create a setting very first thing before I write a book. I really like the idea of doing world building and being like, here's where my story will be, and here's how the kingdoms will work, and how everyone interacts with everyone else. And I will draw a map, and then I will write my book, and it will all fit into place. But I usually don't do that at all. I start with a first draft and maybe a vague idea of the setting. Like I had the name Cacophonous Kingdoms, the idea that they would all be fighting with one another. And that was pretty much it. And then over the course of the first draft, you kind of add in the bits of setting that you need to advance the plot. So I had to have Marigold run away to Wizard Torvil's fortress. Okay, where is that? How does she get there? Wizard Torvil lives outside all the different kingdoms. He doesn't live in any of them. Because all the different rulers are able to hire him for wicked spells, and he can't have allegiance to any one ruler or another, or he wouldn't make any money. So from that came the idea that all these kingdoms are close to each other, but there are spaces in between, kind of like no man's lands. And that's where all of the wicked wizards camp out. So they're literally like not in society. They are alone, separated geographically from one another and from the other different kingdoms. But that all came about as I was writing the first draft. It turned out to be like a really important thematic idea, you know, for Marigold to leave society and go into this kind of wilderness as she's learning to be wicked. She really feels like she's not a part of society anymore. But it wasn't like I sat down and I thought, I have a great idea for a metaphor that I will use my setting to reinforce the theme of my book. It all kind of happened at the same time as I was writing the first draft. But then usually what happens, since I have 7 different books set in 5 different imaginary worlds, I've had a bit of experience with this by now. Usually at the end of the first draft, I will then sit down and kind of take notes on what I've learned about my setting. And that's when I intentionally do some world building after I already know what the plot requires. And there might be things I've put into the first draft that are contradictory in terms of the setting. Like you can't have both of these different things work. So I have to choose like, okay, is this at the top of a snowy mountain or is it down in a valley? Because I said it was both, and now it has to be one or the other. So that does happen after the first draft. I will kind of write the backstory of the world. Maybe I'll draw a map so that I can be consistent in my revisions about where people are going if they're traveling at all. And I'll kind of refine things more intentionally from there. But because setting is so intertwined with plot, at least for me, I like to give myself a chance to just brainstorm and kind of go wild in that first draft and then kind of make it more official later on once it needs to be more solid.
Yeah, and I really like that because I really like that. And I do agree that the Cacophonous Kingdoms is a little bit hard to pronounce sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I really like how you develop your setting because I and a lot of other writers I know we don't really sit down to plan out this whole setting and draw it on a map. I and a lot of other writers I know don't really do that, and I honestly do it kind of like the way you do. I just have this idea, and then sometimes the setting will come with the idea, and then other times I just have this idea of a plot, and then I have to come up with a setting, and so I just make up stuff as I go along.
Yes, that's a really good point, because each book is going to be different. My most recent book that came out this year is called The Tinkerers, And in this book, the setting is like a main character of the story. So I knew a lot more about the setting of the Tinkerers when I started writing, just because it was really, really important to the book that I know a lot about it. In a book like Wicked Marigold, where the setting is always important, but it wasn't quite as large a part of the book. So I felt like I had more freedom to kind of to mess around a little in that messy first draft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, were there any parts of this book that were particularly hard to write? And what do you think was your favorite part to write?
Yeah, I think so. There was a difficult kind of emotional scene toward the end that I wanted to make sure struck the right note. So I rewrote that part many times, as I talked about. Also, just the beginning, like the first 3 chapters of the book, I ended up rewriting a lot. I usually have to rewrite my beginnings many, many times, because when you write a first draft, you might not really be sure where your story is going. And so in the beginning, you're kind of feeling your way around, like, what's the shape of this story? I don't really know. I guess I'll find out. And then once you have written a first draft, you can come back and say, oh, now I actually know what the story is about. I can refine the beginning to more accurately match the rest of the book. But with Wicked Marigold, in the beginning, I had originally started it on the day that Princess Rosalind returns from being captured by Torval. Because I'd always been told, start as close to the action as possible, as close to the day that everything changes. And that's good craft advice, which I usually follow. But when I talked to my editor about it, she said, in order for us to understand how terrible it is that Rosalind comes back, we need to know what Marigold's life was like before, back when she was the only princess in the castle. We need to back up a little bit and describe the normalcy before everything is thrown into chaos. So that whole first chapter, as it's published now, is about Marigold's childhood up to the point that Rosalind returns. So we get to know her and what's important to her and the kind of person she is before that big life-changing event happens. So I think that was a really good piece of feedback that made the book a lot stronger. But yeah, beginnings are hard. I feel like I'm always rewriting my beginnings, and I could always do more and more revisions. I just have to stop at a certain point or the book will never be published, but I could probably keep going forever.
Yes, I feel like that is very much like so many of us writers. We just rewrite our beginnings endlessly because, like, oh, maybe this should happen. Oh, or maybe this, or maybe this, or maybe this. And for me, it's just eventually I get sick of writing the beginning and I just go through like all the versions of the beginnings I have. And I just pick the best one, I suppose.
Yes, at a certain point when you're revising, you're not making it better, you're just making it different. And I think it can be important to recognize that point when it's like, this is not really getting better or worse anymore. I'm just changing things so that I can change them.
Yeah. And so what do you think was your favorite part about writing Wicked Marigold?
Oh, yeah. I think my favorite scene is the one with the iguana. Do you remember the iguana scene?
Yep.
Wicked Marigold. Yeah, so Marigold goes to speak to one of the rulers of the other cacophonous kingdoms. And she has never met this queen before. I think it's Queen Hetty. And she goes in to speak with Queen Hetty, and Queen Hetty has this giant pet iguana on her lap. And the iguana is wearing a little costume. And all around the throne room are these like oil paintings of the iguana dressed as different things. Like in one, the iguana is dressed as a jockey and she's riding on a racehorse. I think there's another one where she's in like a tutu dancing in the ballet. And I had learned that there are iguana owners and lizard owners and reptile owners, I think they're reptiles, who do indeed dress up their iguanas. I don't know if they all commission like a series of oil paintings, But I thought, like, what a cool and unusual hobby that is very funny to me. I really, like, what if this queen were an iguana owner who loved to give her iguana different costumes? And so they're having like a quite serious discussion. And the whole time they're surrounded by these paintings of iguanas in costumes, and the iguana herself um, is like snapping at them and trying to eat them and chasing Torval or chasing Petafog, the imp, around the room. And I just had a really good time writing that part. It went really quickly because I was just enjoying myself describing all the iguana's outfits and what she was going to do next to terrify them. So I think that was my favorite part.
Yeah, that is such a fun part of the book. I really loved reading that. And I loved to pet iguana.
She's great. I would write a whole book about her. She was really fun.
Yeah. And so you have been writing middle grade for a while now, and you have, like quite a lot of books published, which I think is really cool. And so could you tell us a bit about what made you want to write middle grade?
Yeah, I have always loved middle grade fiction since I was a middle grade reader. Middle grade books were the ones that were most important to me when I was a kid. It was long enough ago that we didn't really have YA back then the way that it is now. There were books for teenagers, but it was quite different. And so middle grade fiction was kind of the heart of what you read as a kid. And there were so many books, mostly fantasy novels for young readers, that were my favorite things in the world to read growing up. And I wanted to be an author so that I could write books like those. And that never really changed over the years. Now I read all sorts of things. I still read children's books. I read novels for adults. I read nonfiction of all kinds. I read poetry. I love a lot of different things now. But my heart is still in that place of writing for children, writing longer stories, like imaginative stories for kids. And I think one reason that I like it so much, that I'm so interested in writing for this age group, is that when you're like 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, you're old enough that you are really your own person. Maybe your family or your community has been telling you what kind of person you are or what kind of person you should be. But when you are a middle grade reader aged person, you're starting to think, is that really who I am? Or am I somebody else? Maybe you're experimenting with who you are. You're playing different roles or trying to figure out how you fit into your family and your community, how you fit into the broader world and what that means for you. And I think that's a really interesting time of life. We're not set in our ways when we're 10 or 11 years old. We don't necessarily have a really strong sense of who we are, but we would like to have that. And we're trying to find out in the friendships we make and the choices we make about what to do with ourselves at school, after school, in our families. So all of my books really are about characters who are exploring who they are and where they fit in their world. And some of them decide that the roles that they've been given by society are not necessarily the roles they want to have. So I guess it's really interesting to me, even though I'm not a middle grade reader any longer. I remember what it was like to feel that way. And that's something that I'm still really interested in writing about. Also, just young readers are really cool. Like, I love going to schools and meeting kids. And so many of them are writers, and they're great writers, and they have such good ideas. So I like kids' books. I like kids. It all works out.
Yeah, and, I completely agree with you on, why you write middle grade, because I honestly think that is also a huge reason why I write middle grade as well. because, you're figuring out who you are in the world, and I just really think it is just really amazing to be able to explore that in books. And, at the same time, I also feel like in middle grade, like, you're sort of like old enough to like sort of understand more about the world and all of these sorts of issues that might be, tough to talk about or handle or tackle. But at the same time, like middle grade, it can talk about those things and handle all of those deeper conversations, and yet it also still keeps like the magic and the adventure and the whimsy of being a child. And so
Totally, absolutely. I think actually when you rate middle grade fiction, you can maybe get away with a little bit more than you can writing for older readers, because kids don't have maybe as many expectations yet about what a book should be like. So you can explore those really serious themes that your readers are old enough to understand and think about seriously. But you can also throw in, talking gargoyles and peach trees that grow up in the middle of nowhere and magic spells, and your kid readers will be like, yes, that is cool. I think that's fine.
Yep.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And, last but not least, what is your advice for young writers who want to start writing and get their books out there?
Yes. I'm just so excited for all of you guys, for young writers. I'm excited for me because I get to read your books someday and I cannot wait. But in the meantime, I would say if someone had given me advice as a young writer, I think if I could go back in time and tell myself something, it would be that it's okay to have lots of different interests in the world beyond writing. Obviously, you already know it's important to practice writing. It's important to read a lot, read widely, and you're already doing that. But I think sometimes, I really wanted to be a writer ever since I was a kid. And I felt like if I wasn't writing, then I wasn't being a writer. But being a writer is also about like exploring the world and finding the things that really interest you, the things that you're passionate about. I said I read a lot of nonfiction. I get so many story ideas from nonfiction books, from newspapers. Actually, in Wicked Marigold, Torval, the Wicked Wizard, eventually turns into a blob of glop.
Yeah.
That can move around, and he has things to offer the world still. He's just in a blob of glop form. And that idea came from a news article I was reading about slime molds, which are a kind of fungus creature. I don't know all that much about them, but it's basically a yellow thing that looks like a blob of glop, and yet it can do more than you might expect. So you might be reading just a newspaper article and it can give you a brainstorm for a story idea. The way that you're going to get the material for all of your stories is by thinking hard about the whole world and finding those other things that you're passionate about and learning about those things too. So even if you are a writer who's not necessarily writing every day or writing every month, that's okay. If you're thinking and you're curious and you're excited, that is also writing. And it's a very, very important part of writing. So don't beat yourself up. The other thing that I think is helpful to know is that all the work you're doing, even if it's not published immediately, it's really, really important to the work that you will publish eventually. And sometimes like you might literally end up taking part of that unpublished work and putting it into something that does get published later on. When I was a teenager, one of the first longer pieces of fiction that I wrote my last year in high school. So I was 17, 18 years old. And I was still learning how to be a writer at that point. The story itself, I haven't gone back and read it in many years. I think it was okay. I'm glad it wasn't published. I think I've become a stronger writer over the years. I didn't try to get it published, but one of those characters from that early book was a talking magical gargoyle. And when I needed a character maybe 12 years later, for my first book that did end up being published, I thought, I really liked writing that gargoyle back when I was in high school. I'm going to take him out of that book and put him into this new one. And then he became everybody's favorite character. He's on the cover of my book, Magic Marks the Spot. And that was a character that I invented when I was a kid. And so even if you have to set a story aside and it doesn't become your first published thing, you may still end up using parts of that later on in your writing life. So nothing is ever done. It's just building toward the next thing that you're going to do.
That is absolutely amazing advice for young writers, and I completely agree with you on like everything you said, and especially about the part where like you know, like all the work you are doing is still important, because I feel like a lot of the times, like it can honestly feel like whenever I set a project down, it's like I like it it is hard to sometimes not feel like you wasted all of that time on a project that's not even going to be published, that wasn't even that good. And, you know, like, I've had projects like that. I've definitely had projects like that I honestly, I never want them to see the light of day. But at the same time, I think I still really learned a lot from those projects. And even if, like, they don't really make it out into the world, I still learned a bit more about, you know, like, what works, what doesn't work. And, you know, also about you taking a character from like another book and putting it into a different book. I have done that too. Like, there was this I think there was like this terribly mean character named Diana I'd once written, and I was going to set aside that book, and in one of my books that I wrote like a little later, I needed like a character who was just basically mean and like was basically kind of a foil character, and I was like, hey, I already have this pretty mean character. I'm just going to just, I don't know, relocate her to this other story.
Yep, absolutely. And you know what you're saying about being discouraged and feeling like what you have worked on feels like, you know, if it's not published, then like I just put in all that work for nothing. That's not something that only young writers deal with. Adult writers, multi-published writers, me and all of my colleagues that I know, we still write things that don't get published. We put in years of work into projects that will never see the light of day. And so that, honestly, it's hard. It's really hard, but it's also good preparation for being a writer and kind of training yourself to write because you love the story and because you love the work, and to keep going. Like, it might not work out this time. The thing that I'm writing right now after publishing 7 novels, I don't know if my new thing I'm working on will ever be seen by anybody other than me, but it's still worth writing because it's bringing me joy, and that's important too.
Yeah. And so that wraps up this interview. Everyone, thank you so much for, you know, tuning in. I really hope you enjoyed listening to it. And Caroline, thank you so much for being here. I had a wonderful time talking to you and learning more about Wicked Marigold, which, if to anyone watching this, do go and read and buy this book or get it from your library. It is a fantastic, very humorous, very whimsical middle grade read. I definitely recommend it to anyone who is looking for a sort of funny fantasy read. And, yeah.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. It was a total pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And, yeah, thank you to all of y'all who have watched or listened to this interview. And, yeah, I suppose I shall see y'all in the next video. Alright, bye!